Um, so welcome to the second Radius community call. I'm Reshma. I'm a product manager with the Radius team. So I'll be hosting the community call today. So excited to be here and talk about all the latest and updates on Radius. So let's dive right into the agenda. So we have a packed agenda here where we wanted to cover the Radius events that we were part of in the last month, and then some latest features that got released as part of the Dart 27 release. We have two cool demos, one on recipes that's going to be done by Aaron, and the other one is on the Radius plus Dapr integration that's going to be done by Ryan Novak, and some call to action for the community members on the contribution side of things. So let's dive right into the agenda. So before that, just wanted to quickly go over some logistics here. This call is definitely for you. We are here to talk about the latest demos and progress that we have made with Radius, and the updates on the existing release and what you can look for. Please feel free to ask questions and share any kind of feedback that you might have. So we also have the Radius team here, so please be active in the chat. A lot of your questions might be answered by the Radius team in chat. And if you have any questions along the presentation, please do raise your hand. We'll unmute your mic during the call. But we also have a dedicated session at the end, specifically for Q&A, where you can ask anything on Radius, like any kind of architecture questions or design questions or anything that you might need help with Radius. So let's get started here. Wanted to quickly talk about Radius session at Microsoft Ignite. So we had a breakout session about Radius at Ignite. So this was presented by Brendan Burns, Mark Resanovich, our CTO, and we also had demos from Aaron and Ryan, our Radius core team members. So it's a great session where Brendan explains the challenges that exist with cloud native application space. And then Mark comes in and introduces Radius, where he talks about Radius as the application model for the cloud native apps and how it enables the developers to focus on the developing the apps, and then the operators can focus on the infrastructure that wires the application. We also had demos from Aaron, who took up the role of an Azure operator, where he walks through the recipe building and registering the recipes to the environment. And then Ryan takes up the role of a developer, where he walks through the app deployment experience side of things to deploy the app to the environment that the operator created, leveraging those recipes. So it's an awesome session. Please do check it out if you haven't already. I've attached the link here. We were also part of Quick KubeCon. So we had Radius presence at the Microsoft booth there. We did a pitch for a small group there, and we did get a lot of questions. Thanks for all the questions. So here is a page that basically covers all the resources about Radius, blog posts, videos, and press articles. So we have curated this into a single page to help users find really good content and presentation about Radius. This page will grow over time as Radius participates in new conferences or events. Please do check them out. If anybody is interested in Radius, please do share this link. So you can find this page at docs.radapp.io/community/media coverage. With that, we've also created a new Google group for all the email announcements about Radius. This has already been hydrated with the last community call attendees. So if you weren't part of the last community call and if you wanted to know the latest and greatest about Radius, please join this Google group. So you'll be receiving all the email announcements, community call updates, and the events that Radius would be part of in the upcoming months. So I'm going to quickly cover the features that got released as part of the Dart 27 release. So Radius now supports simulated environments where the application deployments do not result in any containers or the infrastructure resources being created. So these environments are basically useful when you wanted to do some test or dry runs without having to deploy these resources actually. You can interact with the Radius application graph. So I've also added a link here. Do check it out. We have a new app graph API that allows you to now get all the resources and connections within an application via a single API. So instead of building the graph manually via multiple APIs, this single API will get you all the info about the resources and the connections between them. What this enables is it unlocks the custom visualization and other experiences that you can build on top of Radius. You can get more details about this API from the attached API docs link. Next up, we have added Radius to the existing Kubernetes application. Like for example, if you wanted to add Radius to the existing Kubernetes apps without having to like rewrite the experience in Bicep, you can use annotations and CRDs that allows you to add your app to the Radius application graph, deploy recipes, and easily configure connections. There's a tutorial that link that I've attached here. Do check that out. Um, Next up, we have made our reference application eShop on Radius recipe enabled. So this will like provide a single app definition, which you can like deploy across any kind of environment, be it a local dev environment or an Azure or an AWS environment, leveraging the recipes in each of these environment. Do check that out and let us know what you think. Um, and we also had a lot of bug fixes and performance improvements in this release. So we got some installation bugs and experience issues based on the user feedback that you all have been submitting from the community. So these are basically issues that came in from Discord and GitHub. So please make sure to continue logging those issues because it helps us make fix issues and make some like really awesome improvements to the project. So thank you for that. With that, I'm going to go into the just showcase the change log with all the new with all the contributions that have happened for the past release. Thanks and kudos to all the Radius core team members and also to the contributors. With that, I'm going to like go on to the next slide to congratulate all the new community contributors for this release. Thank you so much for your contribution both to code and to docs. Um, so we are here to help you navigate through the code base. And if you have any issues or if you have any friction navigating through the experience, please let us know. We would like to make that experience as seamless as possible for you to both participate on Radius and also to like contribute to Radius. Thanks to everyone who made their first contribution both on the doc side and on the code side. Cool. So with that, let's see a demo on recipes. So last community call, we had an introduction to recipes with our whole getting started experience, which Ryan Novak educated us with. So we are going to take a deeper look into recipes today. Just understand like what is possible with recipes. So Aaron is going to do the demo today. I'm going to pass it on to Aaron for the demo.
Cool. Thank you, Reshma. I'll switch over the spotlight. Before we dive into the demo, and bear with me, I'm actively switching this over to a new laptop. There's been a lot of great questions in the chat I just want to touch on. The first one is, are we going to accept guest blog posts for the docs page too, or just Microsoft ones? So we actually have docs.radapp.io and blog.radapp.io. Those are like our doc site and our blog site. We love contributions. If you have ideas for guest blog posts that you want to write, if you have ideas for docs pages that you'd love to write, please let us know. Yeah, we don't want this to be Microsoft only. We don't want this to be maintainers and approvers, kind of like the core team only. So yeah, let us know. We have the Q&A in a little bit. We can chat about some ideas that you have, open an issue in the docs repo with some ideas you have as well. But yes, 2 thumbs up. We love that type of those types of ideas. The next question was, are simulated environments the same as deep what if that we mentioned last time? The goal is, yes, eventually we would love kind of a deep what if, and I'll kind of back up and explain the thinking there. So today with simulated environments, or even today with regular environments, you give an application to it and it goes off and it actually deploys that application on a particular platform. We'll see that here in the recipes demo here in just 1 minute. But the idea is my application definition is portable across my local environment running on my machine. It's on Azure running with Azure infrastructure. It's AWS running with AWS. But there's a couple scenarios we're looking into, namely, how can we kind of understand what would happen without actually going and running up my AWS or Azure bill? Another one is visualization, like thinking about taking a simulated environment and those app graph APIs and being able to say, hey, this bicep file that I have on disk, what would that application graph look like? And that actually is a little bit of the motivation behind simulated environments is being able to give it a file that I have on disk and then being able to query those app graph APIs. And it'll say, yeah, here's your app, here's the services, here's the relationships, here's the info. And then we don't have it quite yet. And this is kind of to the heart of that question. We don't have it yet, but a deep what if would be if this were to deploy, given the recipes that we have, this is the infrastructure that would have been deployed. So that way, hey, right now you're set as your Azure environment as your default. In the simulated environment, you would be deploying an Azure Cache for Redis and an Azure Cosmos DB. So that's kind of where we would like to take this idea of simulated environments. We're not quite there yet. We'd love some input and help on this one, actually, because we have it working just at the first layer, which is the environment, which is here's the Kubernetes services and the Kubernetes things that would have been deployed. But next, we just have to take that a layer deeper. And that's where the deep of the deep what if comes in of going into the recipe and saying, these are the resources within the recipe. So just wanted to touch on that a little bit. And yeah, a lot of yeah, similar to kind of a Terraform apply. We've looked at that, and Bicep, their team also has like the what if capability in ARMS. So we're just trying to take a look at all of these. We have a feeling kind of what we looked at that this deep what if with simulated environments would actually leverage things like Terraform apply. If your recipes happen to be Terraform, it would leverage ARM what if your recipes happen to be leveraging Bicep and ARM. But we still have a way to go. We're still kind of early on that journey, but stay tuned as we kind of make more progress there. A Terraform plan, yep. That does sound useful. Possible pull off the actual changes in ARM. Yeah, we're partnering with the Bicep team and really staying tuned. They have a community call as well that we've been very active in and been trying to just make sure that we participate with them in their community. Okay, we'll come back on questions here in a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and share my window. If you were at the beginning of the call, you might have noticed I had to quickly switch laptops. I'm on an insider build of Teams, Windows, and Office, and they usually play nice together in the sandbox, but not today. So, am I sharing the right window now of GitHub Codespace?
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay. So this demo that I'm going to be showing actually came about from a request that we got on our Twitter account or X. Somebody had asked, hey, the recipe demo that we showed last time and some of the recipe demos that we were showing kind of scratched the surface of what was possible, but they kind of wanted to understand some more advanced scenarios, like how do you do things like diagnostic logs? How do you do things like private endpoint injection? How do you configure certain things? So today's demo is going to be kind of a level 2 to level 300 look at kind of what's possible with recipes. I'm going to try to keep my chat. I just have one window here open as well, so feel free to drop questions in as well. But yeah, if you're new to recipes, if this is kind of your first time hearing the term and kind of wish you want to dig in a little bit deeper, highly recommend. I think further up in the chat we dropped a great Ignite talk that we just did 2 weeks ago, and we kind of provide that same level 100 kind of intro to recipes and an overview in the demo that we did. So if the demo that I'm about to show, you want to kind of see the level 100, I'd recommend that. But yeah, the kind of like the quick overview is recipes are a way to for a developer to say, I want a Redis cache and purposely keeping it like abstracted at the particular API or dependency layer. And then the recipe is what the operator writes, and the recipe actually says, oh, developer asked for Redis. I'm inside of an Azure environment or an environment running in Azure. I'm going to go run this particular template. Could be Bicep, could be Terraform, and then go and actually spin up that infrastructure. So here on screen, you can actually see an example of a Bicep template, which has an Azure cache for Redis. Now, I'll quickly cover, like, first of all, how do I turn a Bicep template that we're looking at here, which is just normal vanilla Bicep? How do I turn that into a recipe? Well, it's actually just as simple as a single input and a single output, and we call this the recipe contract. So the first thing that I'm going to do is create a parameter called context, and the context parameter is going to be passed in automatically by Radius. You don't have to pass it in yourself. And what this does is it includes information about the underlying environment, application, platform, the namespaces, all the things that you might need to use when you're starting to customize your resources. So for one example of how we can use this is anytime we run this template, we want to make sure we generate not just a like a random or like kind of hashed name, but we want to make sure that every single time that this recipe is run, that it's deterministic, that it resolves to the same name. So that way, if a developer deploys the same application 5 times, you don't end up with 5 different Redis caches because it generates a new unique name, but not deterministic. And the same thing if 5 different developers working on 5 different applications deploy different applications or kind of don't want to stomp on each other's feet, it also makes sure that there's no collision. So we go in depth on a lot of these concepts in our authoring guide, which we can link in the chat as well. But the cool part is you have access to all of Bicep's functions like generating a unique string, but we can seed this with context.resource.id. So that way, when actually this should be an object. So that way, anytime a particular resource in an application call this recipe, we now get a unique deterministic name. So that's kind of the basics of the input. Let's talk about the output. Now, the output is how Radius actually wires everything up. So you can deploy anything that you want inside of this Bicep template, but because this is a recipe for Redis, we expect the values to be pretty standard. So here you have host, port, username, and password, kind of the main things that are inside of a Bicep template or in a Redis cache. So I can just wire those up like this. And that's it. We actually have a functioning recipe right now. I can go ahead and publish this into our container registry, and we are off and running. But with this demo, I wanted to go just a little bit deeper. So far, this is the demo that we showed at Ignite. Let's take this a layer deeper. Let's talk about how some security best practices and diagnostic logs, for example. So kind of the basics here, we've hardened a couple of our security settings. We've disabled the non-SSL port. We've set the minimum TLS version to be 1.2. But you as an operator might say, like, we have a problem today where we have no logs. Like, developers forget and don't know how to hook all of that up. What we really want to add is a diagnostic logs that need to be enforced for every single recipe. And we want them to all go into a common storage account. So that's where you can actually just set parameters like you're used to. And we'll call this one storage account ID. And that'll be a string. And this will be the storage account where all metrics and logs need to land. And this is something that the operator can set up. And because diagnostic logs are really fun to write, actually, they're not that bad. I was playing around with it last night. I'm just going to do a quick copy and paste. And you'll notice that here I'm setting a new diagnostic settings, and this is how you do diagnostic logging in Bicep. I'm targeting that Redis cache that we just did, And then here, I'm setting the storage account ID where I want those diagnostic logs to go. And here I'm setting, give me all the metrics, give me all the logs, and then you can customize this as well. And so now we have our Redis cache, we have all of our diagnostic settings, and we're still outputting the correct things here. So just imagine that you could expand this to include things like tags in Azure. Like I can go in here and say tags and say Radius application, and you can say, and that way in the Azure portal, you can start to say things like this is managed by context.application.id or .name, and then you can say Radius environment can be context.environment.id. So you can do anything you want in this template. Let's take a look at how we then wire this up. So the first command, first, bicep templates can actually use bicep module registries. It's a super handy way to package and distribute bicep modules that the bicep team came up with. So using rad bicep publish, we can target the demo recipe file, and we can set our target to be actually my container registry, aacroffy.azurecr.io/recipes Azure Redis latest. I think on this laptop I haven't signed in yet, so it's probably going to throw a error. Well, anyway, while it's doing that, let's talk about, so imagine that this has all been published. Let's take a look at then how we can register this with our environment. And that's where, here's my next bicep file. And now this is the file that operators are going to be managing. So here we have our storage account, and this is where we want all diagnostic logs from every recipe, every application. We all want them to land here. So this is just a normal storage account. They're my favorite bicep resource because they're so simple. And here's my Radius environment. And you'll notice a couple different things. First, I'm setting my compute to be Kubernetes. So now anytime an application is deployed, run this in Kubernetes. I'm setting up what are known as cloud providers. So basically saying anytime Azure infrastructure is deployed, put it into this specific subscription and resource group. So you say, this is where I want my cloud resources to be deployed. And this is applicable for recipes. And then here's my recipe. And you'll notice that it's a bicep file. I'm pointing to the same exact template path that I just published my recipe template to. And finally, here I'm setting a parameter. And you'll notice that the operator is setting the parameter. The developer never needs to know this. And so what we're saying is every single time this recipe is run, go ahead and pass in this storage account ID into every single run of that. So we make it super, super easy to have operators wire all of that up and define that. And so this has so far been everything that operators have been working with. Let's talk about what the developer does, and I'll drag this down into a kind of a new tab down here. So here, the developer can say, here's my application. I'm going to call it my app because it's my app. Here I have a container called my container. I'm just using our demo image that we normally use. And finally, here's my Redis cache. And you'll notice that it's pretty simple. They don't need to know anything about the recipe. They don't need to know that it's running in Azure. They don't need to know anything about diagnostic logs or storage accounts or the SSL port or TLS. They just say, I need a Redis cache as part of this application. And then once this is deployed, just let this container connect to it. I need this container to draw that line and talk to this particular Redis cache. So developer is thinking in terms of their application and what they need, not in terms of any of that infrastructure or complexity. All of that stuff that we just set up with parameters and diagnostic logs and security and tags, that's all handled up here inside of that recipe. So we offer this great separation of concerns between here's the app, and then here is the recipe and that environment. So I was setting up credentials right before I did this. So assuming everything is working as expected, what's the Mac key binding for terminal. It's been terminal, new terminal. I'm Windows 9 like 75% of the time, and I switch over to Mac for random things here and there. So let's go ahead and see that we have our environment here. Let's go ahead and just deploy that environment one more time. So I'm saying take this environment that we defined and go and deploy that so it's ready to go inside of our cluster. So it's going and deploying this. Should be pretty quick here. Cool. So this actually deployed both the environment and that storage account. Now let's go ahead and deploy our application. So this is actually taking our application. It's compiled this into a JSON format. It submitted it into the Radius control plane, which includes the deployment engine. The deployment engine is looking at this bicep file and breaking it down into its parts and building the dependency graph. And you can see that it deployed the application. And once that's done, it deployed the Redis cache with that Azure cache for Redis. And then once that's done, here in hopefully just a few seconds, it will deploy that container. So now we have this all deployed and ready. And let me quickly pop into Azure. Let me make sure. If you don't have the Azure Mask extension, it's a great way to do demos without giving away any sort of fun little object IDs and things. So anywho, here is that storage account that we just deployed, and here's that Azure cache for Redis. And let's open up the storage account, go into storage browser, blob containers, and here we can see here's our logs, here's our metrics, and the way that blob storage works for logs, you have to go in a couple layers here because they sort them by the resource type and then the date. And you can see that it's now outputting all of our JSON files with our logs. So that now we can see that all of our logs and all of our metrics are now flowing into our storage account. And if I pop all the way back up and go to my resource group, we can also take a look at that Azure cache for Redis. And we can see that the non-SSL port is disabled. We can see that it's using that premium SKU and that it has all of the things that we need. So end to end, we're now seeing all of those advanced features. And just to prove that everything is hooked up, I can go to diagnostic settings and I can see, yep, my diagnostic settings were set up as expected. I think we're actually good on time. So let me just talk a little bit about so we just took a look at how operators can set parameters for when they don't want developers to have any sort of knowledge or need to configure anything. However, we do let you still give those parameters to developers. Let's jump back into the code space really quick. And let's say, for example, we want the developer to have control over something like the throughput. Maybe the operator says, "Hey, we allow a couple different SKUs for our Redis cache, and we want the developer to be able to pick that." So let's pick capacity, for example. We can just go up here and set another parameter called param capacity. Is that an int? Yeah, I think that's an int. Let's say it defaults to 1, which is the lowest one. So just by default, you kind of get the lowest one. But then it's not showing the little tooltips. But anywho, we'll just wire that up. And then let's just say, and bicep, you can say the min value is going to be 1. The max value of this is going to be, I think it's 4 or 5. Anyway, I'll put 4. And so now we've just added an extra parameter to our recipe. And now here inside of the application, the developer now has the ability to actually go in and set the parameter that are on this. So they can say, I actually need a higher capacity for this particular app. Kind of the default, it doesn't quite cut it for my awesome app that I'm making. So I really need the third capacity. So this is just a direct pass through. You can actually do some really cool things in Bicep where you can do like t-shirt sizing, like small, medium, and large. I'll see if I think in the Ignite demo that we did, which is linked up in the chat a little bit, we have an example of how to do some fun kind of mapping uh, of t-shirt sizes. So that way your developer doesn't need to know what a capacity means, like 1, 2, 3, 4. They don't need to know premium, standard, all the different SKUs. They just say, I need a small Redis or I need a medium Redis. So that's kind of a look at how you can also give developers the ability to specify their parameter. Let me check the chat really quick to make sure that if there's any additional questions here. Looks like, yeah, the Radius team has been kind of very active in the chat, helping answer everything. Oh, for the connection section, that's a great question about taking a look at what we did inside of the app here. We said, I want my database, or sorry, my container to talk to this particular DB. Let's see if I can actually show you this quickly. I'm kind of going off script from my original demo, but those are often make some of the best demos. Um, uh, so there's a command that we have called rad run. It does everything that deploy does. Oh, I think I might have misconfigured something here, so it might not deploy correctly. Let me back this up. Try that one more time. Rad run not only deploys the application, which we're seeing here, but it also will set up some port forwarding automatically, so that way you have direct access to that app. It will set up log forwarding, so all of the logs from the container will land here in the terminal as well. And then it will also allow you to pop open the browser here in a second as well. So we can see that we're now running at localhost 3000. Let's see if, and because we're in a code space, it's actually doing some fun port forwarding here. Oh, interesting. Anywho, it must be some fun port forwarding thing, but that's okay. We in our Ignite demo and in our tutorial that we have on our website, you'll actually see that connections go in and inject a couple environment variables such as the host, the port, the username, the connection string, password, all of the things that you need to connect to your database. That connection goes and injects those values for you. And it actually sets up that Radius application graph as well. So if you do rad app graph, my app, we'll see that here's our application in its full ASCII, or not even ASCII, its full text format, where you can see here's my app, here's the container, it has a connection to my DB. And then here are all of the actual resources underneath the hood. So we can say here under the hood, here's all of my Kubernetes resources. And then for that Redis cache, you can see that the container has a connection to it. And we can see here's that Azure cache for Redis with a deep link into the portal. And here's that diagnostic setting with a deep link into the portal. So we give you through the command radapp graph, that connection that you set up not only helps you with environment variables, it also sets up all of this awesome graph information that you can just deep link straight into all of those resources. Let me check if there's any other questions. To make sure the environment variables are secure. Good question. And this is one where we would love to hear how in your applications you actually consume all of your connection information. Today, we're just injecting environment variables, but we also are looking into doing volume mounts, so that way you could access those via a file. We're also looking into secret stores. We recently introduced a secret store abstraction in Radius and a resource. So throw either in the chat or in GitHub, let us know what's your preferred way of accessing that configuration data. Because yeah, we're just doing environment variables today, but we would love to hear other ways that you would like to consume that. Other than that, is there a resource available for how to set up t-shirt sizing? For now, check out that Ignite video, but I'll see if I can first of all, just write a quick how-to guide in the recipes doc. That'd be a good one. But I'll chat with the Bicep team on what their best practice is as well. Can we have a view of the application graph? Yeah, actually I hit that one, so we got to take a look at the RADApp graph. Other than that, I think that is all of the comments. And then it looks like Ryan Nowak is back in the call as well, so I can actually help kick it over to him for our next demo as well. Let me make sure that Ryan, you are a presenter on this call. I'll allow your mic, so at least I have that so far.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I don't have presenter mode yet. By the way, if people like, feel free to send us issues if you see things during the presentations or community call that you're like, huh, I would want to use this a little differently. Like, we'd love for you to chat with us more, open issues. Love for folks to contribute to some of these things if you're interested in it and able to. Even just giving us feedback is really helpful. So whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
We've
And I
generally
also
found that people
go
have a pretty easy time getting started with Go, even if they've never used it before.
Yep, and one plug, we can talk about this more in the Q&A, but in terms, Ryan mentioned, let us know if there's ways you think of doing things differently, especially with recipes. I forgot to mention, we actually have a repo of community recipes where we're actively working on building out all of our local dev recipes. Those are the ones that just run lightweight containerized infrastructure. But we also are working on building out Azure and AWS. So yeah, feel free to dig in if you have issues, questions, comments, or even just want to pick up and help if you're a bicep expert. We'd love some ideas and some suggestions. So definitely check out our recipes guide. We even have some contribution guides on how to get started and how to contribute to all of these. So that was my last plug of the demo.
Great. I'm going to take it away then. You don't have any slides for me, do you?
Don't believe so.
That's probably better. It's probably better. So hey everybody, I was on a Dapr community call earlier this week, and Aaron asked me if I could repeat the demo here. And I don't know how much we've had a chance to talk about Dapr as part of the Radius community call. I think those of us who kind of started the Radius project are big fans of Dapr. A lot of us worked on it back in the day when Dapr was pretty new. I was engaged there and helped a lot with a lot of the sort of programming model decisions, and I wrote a lot of the .NET SDK. Some other folks on the team also contributed to that. And so we're kind of excited about it because we feel like these projects go together pretty well. If you do want to learn more about Dapr, you can do that at their website, dapr.io. So just a quick plug. And I'm going to show a really short demo today. It's going to be a pretty similar demo to, I think, some of the ones that you may have seen before, if you've seen any of our presentation materials or any of our content. And so the thing that I want to focus on for this demo, I realize I'm just kind of scrolling here, is I want to focus on this integrate with infrastructure of your choice kind of thing that's on the screen right here. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So Radius helps you manage deployment, configuration, and sort of operations of apps. Dapr helps as well with a lot of operational concerns of apps like telemetry. And the difference between these two projects is Dapr is involved in how you write code and how your code functions and how you actually communicate with dependencies and resources you're using, be they databases or message queues or secret stores or other things. So you could think about Dapr as something that influences the way that you write code. And inside Radius, we try to make sure that we're not really influencing the way that you write code too much. I think these projects are pretty conceptually compatible, and they came from us here in the Azure Incubations team, kind of looking at cloud native development and saying, okay, if we made some improvements, what would we want to improve? What would we want to simplify? I think some of the things that Dapr simplifies is it provides abstractions for how your code is going to interact with dependencies. And then it simplifies a bunch of things that you probably have to deal with as an applications developer, like how do you manage the credentials to that resource? How do you do tracing and metrics for that resource? Should there be retries if something is down? And then I think one of the really cool things that Dapr does is because they're providing their own abstractions, which they call building blocks, it means that they can make incompatible technologies appear compatible, and that's what this diagram on the screen is showing. So you could use Dapr to program against kind of this idea of a pub sub message broker, and then the implementation of that message broker might be Azure Service Bus, it might be AWS SNS, it might be Google Cloud Pub Sub, it might be RabbitMQ. There's a lot of options, and Dapr calls these concepts building blocks. So if you dig into the concepts here, you can start to learn about the building blocks, and there's a bunch of different building blocks that they define. The one that you're going to see in this demo is the state management building block. And you could sort of think about state management as like an abstraction for key value stores. So if you need a kind of primitive database and you don't want to couple yourself to a specific database, Dapr state stores can help you there, especially if there are multiple technologies that you need to use. And I think a helpful metaphor to think about these building blocks is kind of like, well, what if there was a virtual machine for state management? The same way that there's virtual machines for things like Java and .NET, and many languages can run on the same thing. What if there's a way for many databases to appear to function the same way to an app, or many kinds of messaging technology to appear to function the same way, or many kinds of secret stores to appear to function the same way? So that's a big value proposition of Dapr. I want to jump into some code. And feel free to ask your questions in the chat. There's some folks here like Aaron who are pretty knowledgeable about it and can answer any questions that you might have. I want to jump here to some code. And this is the same demo that we normally show. I think it's probably pretty similar to the demo that Aaron just gave you. But instead of a Redis cache, we've got a Dapr state store here. So my Dapr state store is the thing that I'm going to be using a recipe to create. Instead of directly creating Redis, I'm creating a Dapr state store. The other thing that I want to show you is I want to show you a little bit of app code. And so inside this app code, again, this is our demo app. So we just use this to teach people about Radius and kind of talk about it. And so you'll notice that there's kind of this if block here. It's a little ugly, but try to just go with me here. We're detecting what technology is enabled based on the connection that's defined. So we might have a connection to Redis, we might have a connection to Mongo, we might have a connection to a state store. And so we've enabled using Redis directly, we've enabled using Mongo directly, and we've also enabled using any Dapr state store. And so if we look at the state management building block back here, I'm looking for the set of supported state stores. The set of supported state stores is all of these. So by adding the ability in this code to use Dapr, if Dapr is something that I've adopted, then I've actually added the ability to use any of these if that's something I want to do, which is pretty powerful. And that's kind of the general flavor of how these building blocks work. Is the code you write inside Dapr is consistent, easy to use in development, instead of coupling yourself to a specific technology. Now that's a trade-off. I'm kind of meant to introduce the concepts. I think there are cases where you might really care deeply about the data technology that you're using. There are other cases where you may not care about it. So like any decision we make, this comes with trade-offs, but I wanted to kind of talk about it. And so here's sort of my example app, and I'll just highlight a couple things about this. So first of all, we've got the container deployed here. It's just the same container we've always seen. Second of all, we've got the state store deployed here, and we've got a connection to the state store. I called it state store in this case, so it's going to light up that code that I showed you before. When that happens, we're going to go down this code path, and we're going to create the Dapr repository in my code. And you can see that I'm creating a Dapr client, so I'm using their SDK here. You don't have to use an SDK with Dapr. You can just you can write your own HTTP requests if you want, but I like to use the SDK. And so you can see that basically my storage library is the Dapr client for this to-do functionality that I'm building. I'm just working with the Dapr client rather than working with Mongo or Redis or something directly. So that's the abstraction layer that gets inserted. Now, the way that this works is inside my app, I'm going to be talking to Dapr instead of talking directly to that technology. So my application code is going to connect to Dapr instead of connecting to a Redis cache or a MongoDB or whatever storage technology I'm using in this case. And so the way that you do that in Radius is we have this extensions mechanism. and extensions are a list, not a map, which is why Bicep is complaining. Gotta love strong typing. And so you can see that we've got completion and tooling and all this stuff for Dapr Sidecar. You can see that it's complaining. I have to give this an app ID, which is kind of a way to identify something in Dapr. I'll just call it web app. And what this is going to do is it's going to add the Dapr API to my deployment. So when I deploy this, it's going to get the Dapr API injected, and then I'll be able to talk to it through. Then I'll be able to talk to it through the sidecar that gets injected. I want to show you another way to do this. So this is kind of the Bicep way to do it. We've got pretty good support for most of the Dapr building blocks here. We don't have all of them. We have, I think, secret stores, pub sub, and state, which are kind of the most common ones. There's some other ones that we're looking to add in the future. I want to show the same thing from the perspective of a Helm chart, because it ends up being a little bit different. Dapr's pretty deeply integrated with Kubernetes. You can use it outside of Kubernetes as well, but I think most people that are using Dapr are on Kubernetes. And the way that you enable Dapr inside Kubernetes is like this. You have a deployment for your app. To say that you want a Dapr sidecar in it, you say that Dapr is enabled using an annotation, and you say that Dapr's app ID is web app. I'll just put these side by side so you can see that these are kind of doing the same thing. Like here we're saying that Dapr is enabled, and here we're saying what the app ID is, and then there's more settings related to Dapr that I don't need to set for this demo. Likewise, if you look at the docs, there's a lot more settings for Dapr that I don't need for this demo, and they would slot in here as well. So kind of revisiting this Helm chart, I think I showed this demo last week. The way that you can enable Radius for Helm and Kubernetes is pretty similar. So if you're using Kubernetes as your way of interacting and doing Radius, you can see that there's clearly some common DNA here, and we were inspired a little bit by what Dapr's done. So the way that you interact with Radius if you're using Kubernetes as your interface is by adding annotations, much like Dapr. And so we can actually just kind of run the same demo. And I'm going to do this from the Helm perspective because I already have this. I showed this yesterday, and so I kind of already have it set up. But you can see that we're using a recipe here. We're creating a Dapr state store with the recipe. I'm again in a code space. I've got a Kubernetes cluster running in the code space that I've set up for dev. I'll just show that real quick. If I do a rad recipe list, it's going to hit that dev cluster. You can see that I've got, you don't have to understand all this output, but you can see that I've got some recipes configured. These are the Radius local dev recipes that we provide. You can see that I've got recipes for a couple building blocks already built in. If I deploy this, this is just a script because I can't remember what commands run with Helm. Trust me, this is just running a Helm deploy. And I actually deployed this yesterday, which is why you're seeing revision 2. I can deploy that. I can show the app graph. Just have some scripts for these so you're not waiting for me to type. So this was the app graph that I got in my local dev environment. You can see that I've got a little bit different recipe output. So we stood up some services inside Kubernetes to be our Dapr state store. And then you can see that we created the Dapr configuration for this state store. So my web app that talks to the state store has been deployed. The recipe did all the Dapr configuration for you, so it's kind of self-contained. I've actually already deployed this to AWS and Azure. If I wanted to, I've got a couple different environments set up here. Those environments have different recipes, just like the demo that we give with Redis. And I can actually just deploy with Helm to those clouds as well. So I don't have to do anything different. I could also do this with Bicep. I've already showed you the Bicep file that's the equivalent. I just had the Helm one set up. So you can see the same thing on AWS, and you can see that on AWS we got MemoryDB and a Dapr configuration. And then on Azure, you're going to see the same thing. Now, I realize now that I used Redis in all of these examples. I didn't actually have to use Redis in all these examples, and that's some of the power of Dapr. You might do things like say, I'm going to use a Redis cache for development because it's easy to run in development. But I'm going to use Azure Storage on Azure because that's really cheap. Or I'm going to use DynamoDB on AWS because I really need high throughput. And because Dapr lets you substitute those technologies for each other, it makes recipes even more powerful because your recipes might not just configure like a cache of a different size. They might actually configure a totally different technology if that's something you want to do. And the recipes for these look a lot like what Aaron showed you earlier with recipes. So in this state store folder, I've got an Azure and an AWS recipe. And this probably looks a lot like Aaron was showing you before. The only difference here is that we're also creating the configuration for Dapr. So this is kind of the extra step. Create the resources that you want, create the configuration for Dapr, that's part of the recipe, and then return data back to Radius down here, which we use to kind of understand what you did. The story for AWS is the same. And again, I'm using Redis in this demo. It doesn't have to be Redis in this case because I'm using Dapr. Could be memory, could be Redis, could be Elasticache, could be OpenSearch, could be DynamoDB. There's a bunch of different supported technologies that I could be using here. And that's some of the flexibility that Dapr gives you. So any good questions in the chat that I should answer before I hang this up, Aaron?
There's one question in this example. The recipes are in Bicep, but the app deployment is in Helm. That was more, I guess, just more of a confirm, what we're looking at.
And you can mix and match. That's one of the things that we're trying to do with recipes as a concept. You probably have ways that you interact with infrastructure today. You probably have existing code, existing scripts, existing Terraform. We really want to make sure that you can use the things that you're already using that are making you successful. Whether you want to keep using those or not, you still have a migration path, right? You still have the ability to do it. So I think the way that I think about this is we're trying very hard not to be opinionated about what technologies people use, especially in the area of recipes, because we know that people have existing things that they want to bring. And so if you have, right now we have Bicep and Terraform. Here's an example of a Terraform recipe. I don't know if you showed one earlier for Redis, Aaron, but here's an example of a Terraform recipe for Redis for AWS. And you can see that we're actually using something from the public module gallery. So our hope is that if you have existing Terraform or you just like working with Terraform, that it's really easy for you to wrap any Terraform module and kind of make it a recipe. If there's other technologies that you're using that you'd like to see support for, we're interested to hear about it because we want to support a variety of things. And then on the app definition front, kind of the same story. Like, what we started Radius kind of building our own abstraction and trying to abstract over the way that we think about cloud native programming as developers. What we heard along the way is, well, that's a big change for a lot of people for their existing applications, one. And two, there's a lot of folks that live in the Kubernetes world and they just want to keep living in the Kubernetes world. They've adopted those tools and really like them. So we've created a way to do Radius from Helm and Helm or Kubernetes manifests or Customize or any of those tools. Or you can use Bicep in our abstraction, and you don't have to make difficult trade-offs or difficult choices when you decide what to do.
Yep. There's one more question. So could we create a recipe to allow, say, for a new developer to deploy a full landing zone that they can then use to build upon? That's a good question. I'd say that instead of the recipe itself being what spins up that entire environment, we actually would say the environment itself contains all of those recipes. So Ryan, do you have any thoughts on kind of how we think about setting up that landing zone?
I mean, I think the idea makes sense, right? Like, I'm sure a lot of people either have or have considered the idea of, for example, like, what if my development and testing environments could just be created on demand? I think the ideal that a lot of people might be working towards or might have already achieved is like, what if my developers could go into Backstage and say, I need a new environment for testing? It feels like something that you could do today. I think if folks are interested in that, I'd be curious. I'd be curious if you think that there's something we need to do in Radius to make that better today. Because you could do that with existing tools like Bicep and Terraform. I'd be curious if folks have tried this out. I'd be really curious if folks have tried this out, if they feel like there's something we need to do in Radius to make that easier. Because I think it definitely makes sense. Like, everybody wants more on demand, and we want more stuff to be on demand. So Thomas says that's something he's working on. So Thomas, we'd be interested to hear about how that's going, and if there are things that you think we should do to help with that in Radius.
I think we're near the end. Yeah, we can continue with some of the Q&A, but I
Yeah.
think Reshma, you had a couple quick closing slides, and then we can stay and do Q&A for.
Yeah, I just
got
wanted to
my morning free.
quickly give some useful links to the community. So one of the things that I wanted to share here is for folks who are interested in contributing, we have a good number of issues in our repo marked with the good first issues label. So these issues can quickly help you get started and familiarize yourself with the code base. So do check them out. And if you have any issues navigating through them, please let us know. We are also wanting to make this good first issue list as exhaustive as possible so that it covers all the issues from other areas of Radius as well. So that's one call to action here. And the next thing is what Aaron already shared. If you have new recipes that you're building or experimenting with, please add in that as a contribution to the recipes repo. There are also some existing local dev recipes, Azure recipes, and AWS recipes that you can look at as an example and start building your own recipes. That the other community members can also leverage. We can also do a show and tell in our next community call if you have new scenarios or experimentation on the recipes that you've developed. And again, a quick refresh on some of the useful links here. There's a link on Discord. Engage with us on Discord, start our GitHub repo, and please join our new Google group for the latest Radius news, email announcements on that. With holidays around the corner, we are still working out the next community call date. We'll be back soon with our next community call date, and please keep the feedback coming and let us know what you think. With that, we can go back to the Q&A and see if we might have anything that we wanted to address in the chat first.
Cool. Yeah, there's some questions in the chat around some about the inner workings of Terraform and how we handle Terraform modules. Kind of the basic answer, which Karishma from our team answered, is we do run Terraform targeting that the module, or if you're using a wrapper module, making sure that it has the expected inputs and outputs, and then we pass in all of the variables and the context if you've specified it. So we do a little bit of checking before we start injecting that recipe input, but then we just do the normal plan and apply. And then when you delete the recipe, we destroy all of that infrastructure as well. But yeah, I think those was most of the questions. I'm happy to stick around for a little bit if there's any additional questions, but I think that concludes the formal portion of today's presentation. Thank you, Reshma, for leading, and Ryan for the demo. There was a question about our roadmap. Stay tuned. We are actively working on putting together a roadmap that will be available as a GitHub project. So you'll be able to see the board of everything that is on our backlog in priority order, everything that we're working on, everything that we've completed. But yeah, so stay tuned. We'll hopefully next community call have a link to that, but we're actively working on that. Other than that, we'll have 0.28 out the door, hopefully in the next week or two, finishing up the final touches on that. But yeah, we appreciated all the amazing questions. There's one more question about Radius running in container apps would be a killer offering, for teams not wanting to support AKS just for Radius. We agree. A serverless Radius experience where you don't have to manage a Kubernetes cluster is definitely something we want as well. As part of the roadmap we're putting together, you'll start to see some serverless discussions and designs popping up there as well. So we'll have a lot to share, and especially we really want some feedback on this soon. So we'll have more to share and get feedback on very soon. But yes, we love that idea. But yeah, any other final questions? Cool. Well, we'll post the recording of the call. We will send out on Discord updates to all of that. Make sure to join there. And thank you so much to everyone. We're looking forward. We'll see you again, hopefully in the next few weeks. We're still figuring out if we're going to get one in before the holidays or shortly thereafter. So stay tuned. Join the Google group and we'll send the announcement. Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.